Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. And the chat room says, Ask Noah is going to be live now. Yes, it is. We are live again tonight. Welcome back. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host, delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Noah, I have missed you so terribly.
Distance makes the heart grow fonder. We're back.
It does. It also makes you forget people. They also say that time heals all wounds.
I had a friend. I should say I have a friend because we're still very close. We're friends. But I mentioned to him that, hey, I hadn't heard from you for a while or whatever, and he's like, don't take this the wrong way, but I'm very ADD, so like if you're not in front of my face, like I just forget you exist. And I'm like, oh, okay, well that makes me feel better. Now I know that it's not personal. So no, it's been good. It's been a great opportunity. The amount of work that I've been able to get done here in the studio is awesome. I am slowly getting the video portion of the studio built out and worked. I've been able to get some work done on getting machines refreshed. I've upgraded stuff to getting Thunderbolt, so I can walk here with my laptop and plug a Thunderbolt cable in and get connected to all the things. And so it's going to provide us for some... The first 500 episodes of Ask Noah have had us a particular feel and a particular way to do things, and I think the next 500 episodes are going to allow us to grow a little bit. Speaking of which, our 500th celebration is coming up. It is next week, Tuesday, August 4th, at the Tamarack Tap Room in Woodbury, Minnesota. So if you have any opportunity to join us, I highly encourage you to do so. Please make the time if you're in the Minneapolis area to come and join us. It'll be at the Tamarack Tap Room, which is at 8418 Tamarack Village. It's in Woodbury, Minnesota. The Tamarack Tap Room, I just want to say a couple of words about them because they're an awesome business in the Woodbury, Minnesota area. They hosted us for our 100th episode and allowed us to broadcast live and all the rest of it. And as you can imagine, like trying to find an event that will let little old Noah and little old Steve that run their little goofy podcast go and broadcast live is not necessarily, it's kind of a heavy ask for a lot of places. And so to be able to do that without charging us a gajillion dollars or expecting us to buy a gajillion dollars worth of food or drinks or whatever, it's kind of unique. So if you have any way to join us, August 4th, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central, we'll be doing the show live from the Tamarack Tap Room. There'll be food, there's drinks available, and most and best of all, it'll be Steve and I, and we'll give you an uncomfortable man hug. How's that for a promise?
There's a plug if I've ever heard one.
So, Steve, you have been a busy boy in our time off as well. You wanted to make a one-touch installer for your house, and that led you down somewhat of a rabbit hole. Tell me a little bit about the one producible operating system that turned 8 snowflakes into one nice, curated, custom-built ovens build of a distro.
Well, I'll start off in the negative, which is, always what you should do, right? I didn't wake up one morning and think, what my life needs is some ignition, some butane, a little OS tree, and another container in my registry. Wasn't actually what I woke up thinking. I have 8 or 10 disparate machines around the houses between laptops and desktops and computers that serve specific function, like one for the projector. We've got one that we do for communications. We call it the comm center, one in the kitchen, all that sort of stuff. My family has been previously using Endless OS, and we kind of documented the love that we had for that distribution. And part of it is I've just outgrown what I can do on it. So I liked the idea of the mutable operating system, but I got stuck in a place where I was really having to contort myself in order to accommodate for, let's say, new requirements as time has gone on in the house. Mm-hmm. So I was looking for a way to have like an immutable operating system that was actually customizable. And there's a lot of ways you can skin this. I actually considered Nix, and I ruled it out for a couple of reasons. But one of the things that I kind of wanted to back myself into was, in this project, what can I do that will sharpen my industry skills as well as my home skills? And that's part of the reason why I decided to move away from the idea of Nix. Even though I took a serious look at it, it didn't have anything that I could apply in my day job. And ultimately, whenever, I'm sure that Noah can attest to this, whenever you can, you do a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1, you know, whatever you use your time on, hopefully you can, you know, get 2 or 3 things done at the same time.
100%. And the other part is wide domain knowledge also leads to, it becomes a force multiplier, right? So if you have a domain knowledge that, okay, it applies to these 3 things or 4 things, like you're saying, for every 1 minute I spend, there's the initial savings of, okay, I learned this thing and now it helps me in these 3 areas. But also you can then build off of that domain knowledge in other areas, and then everything gets faster and everything goes forward.
Exactly, right? And so the solution that I kind of landed on was I went with BootC and Fedora Silverblue. So BootC gives me like a container file, which spits out an image, and then I worked in a universal USB installer and a configuration file for the individual computers. So while my goal wasn't to put containers everywhere, because we've documented on the show, I believe using containers for the right use case, which is why I still have VMs as part of my infrastructure. Mm-hmm. The goal was to make the operating system reproducible. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I've done all kinds of iterations on this in the past. I'm still on my desktop and my laptop. I still use Arch with a series of playbooks that stands it up. And I do my best to try and document the changes that I make on them and feed it back into the playbook. But that's not really reproducible insofar as you could miss something, forget a config, you know, all that sort of stuff. So the problem that I was really looking to solve was I wanted to have a place for end users or whoever, because some of these computers are public, like the projector machines and stuff like that. The kids come over and they're friends and they play around or do whatever they need to do. And so I really wanted it to be predictable and really difficult for an end user to break the system. So if you accidentally uninstall Steam, which is a flat pack, well, I'm sorry, but it doesn't hurt the computer. It'll take us 10 minutes to re-download everything. Right. So that's really what the goal was. And one of the reason why Endless didn't solve this for me was because I ended up having like a myriad of problems that cropped over time. So I wanted tail scale on the laptop so they could access things at home. I did solve this with Endless. It took a lot of contortion and a lot of learning. I had to learn how to make that actually work out of your home directory in an immutable operating system where it can't actually write the PID file where it thinks. Anyways, there's a lot there. I had printer driver problems, and that was a problem for me. Didn't work on Endless, and sadly, my sister-in-law, I deployed Endless for her, and we can't get her laptop working with her printer. She lives literally like 1,200 miles away from me. Mm-hmm. So that's still broken. But so I have a bunch of these things that were difficult or not possible to do in Endless. Like printer drivers were the bane, because if they didn't work, they didn't work, and there was no way to get them to function properly. So I had a bunch of those sorts of things that I wanted to do. I wanted to bake in RustDesk, for example, so that was happening. So all of these kind of things that if you really contorted yourself and squinted and turned your head the right way, you might be able to get Endless to do it. It was getting to be too much of a pain.
Yeah. Can I ask a little bit, what, aside from the lack of domain knowledge, was there anything you didn't like about Nix? Or if, like, so for example, let's just say for the sake of argument, you hit retirement and so work is no longer a thing, and it's purely just Steve is going to live in the Ovens compound, and it really doesn't matter what the rest of the world does or doesn't do or how it works. Was there anything in Nix that you didn't like, or that you said, I feel like there's just a better way to crack that nut?
So There's going to be someone out there that will know that like this statement is out of ignorance, but I can build a container on my desktop and push it to the container registry, and everybody pulls that down. There is no rebuilding your Nix config on the local machine. I'm sure that there's probably some way that I just didn't discover because I didn't look that hard. But I've got machines, I've got old ThinkPads, and I've got brand new machines, and I've got like little tiny 1 liter PCs, and I've got actual desktops. And so I didn't want them all to have to build their own thing. And so that was part of it. There were some appealing things about that too, right? You go to do your Nix build and it will bail out and just not let you go forward. Like you can't actually boot into an unworkable system because it will know if your Nix build is correct. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it really came down to the domain knowledge was difficult, and I would have to rely fairly heavily on AI in order to wrap my head around and administer this for a bunch of people, right? So in retirement, maybe.
Okay.
Who knows?
Okay, so then the other thing that you said that caught my attention, so you have family members that don't live in your immediate geographic area, but you need to support them. So what did that look like by way of a migration? Are they going to the Evans family build? And if so, how do you get it on there?
They will be, but we're not going to touch that remotely, or at least not yet.
Okay.
It would be fairly simple, honestly, because getting them to flash a USB drive, not a hard thing. I could also mail them a USB drive. I would have to make a container registry public. That would be the challenge with that. So probably not going to do that unless I'm actually in front of the computer. But once I do, and it has Tailscale installed, it would be no big deal to update it over Tailscale.
Mm-hmm.
So because just like other immutable operating systems, if it pulls down a container and the container fails to boot, it will just go back to the one that previously worked.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So.
Okay. All right. So it's not something that you would be comfortable attempting remotely, but once we get there, then we'll be okay. So walk me through what the process looked like to get this up and running on your machines. Like, kind of, where did you start? Did you build it on one machine and then iterate, or did you? What did that process look like to get you started?
So I moved through the process of I did it in a VM, and I practiced booting that VM and injecting my ISO instead of the USB until I got to the point where I was pretty sure it would work. And then I have an old Dell that still has 32 gigs of RAM in it, but for battery reasons and other reasons, it's really heavy. It's one of those 17.9 inch laptops, beast of a thing. Mm-hmm. So I moved to that, and then I tested on that. And once I got that working, because of course there are differences between VM and physical hardware, then I moved on to the oldest laptop that I had. And by the time that I had a VM, this Dell, and the oldest laptop that I had, and they were all working, it was just take that USB drive and plug it in and walk away.
So walk me through, like I'm 5 years old, what is on that flash drive?
So this is a customized version of Fedora CoreOS just to do the installation, because it has all the BootC tooling for it. So Fedora CoreOS has the ability and the understanding to reach out to a web endpoint to get configuration to apply to the machine itself. So the USB could have been anything. It just needed to be something that had the BootC environment. I could have used Ubuntu for that, right? You can install BootC on Ubuntu and all the rest of that. But because my lens of I wanted to double this for work, Fedora CoreOS is definitely part of the Red Hat ecosystem in terms of the technology that it uses and how you go about it. So like your 5, it's a Fedora CoreOS that's slightly customized. So one of the things I had to do was I didn't want to plug in all of the laptops, which meant dragging them to like a free available port. And it turns out some of those old guys, they needed Wi-Fi drivers that we just take for granted. They're not in base OSs. So I extracted the Wi-Fi, 3 different Wi-Fi drivers, and shoved them into that image so that they could boot up and pull down the container without me having to figure out where's the closest LAN cable to them.
If you don't mind me asking, how does one take a driver and shove it into an install?
So there is a firmware directory, a Linux firmware directory on all computers. And inside of that, so basically from a working machine, I went and installed Fedora on one of them just to get the latest firmware. And I did it on my Dell. It doesn't have to be the target device. You just have to know what network card or Wi-Fi that you're going for. And then you just install the firmware for it as part of the Linux firmware package for that driver. And then they're just files in that directory. So I just lifted those and put them in the Linux firmware directory. And when your network card goes to be activated, it checks the firmware directory. And if it has the blob in the firmware directory, it will load it.
Interesting. Okay, fascinating. All right, so you went and found a distro then that had those drivers and pulled those out of there?
It was literally just, I had Debian 13 running on that old Dell. It can be literally anything that happens to have access to the drivers in their repository.
Okay. All right. So you get the drivers, you create, was there anything else you had to do to quote unquote customize the Fedora install, or past that, other than some extra drivers, it was basically just a Fedora CoreOS ISO that you burned to?
That was pretty much it, I believe. Well, okay, I did have to do something else. This is a little bit of a tangent, but by default, BootC wants to grab the entire container image before it splats it on the hard drive. The problem with this is the container image exceeded the 8 gigs of RAM that I had in some of these old machines because it's an entire operating system. So I had to work around that. It turns out there's a technology that allows you to stream a container layer by layer. And so instead of grabbing the entire container and splatting it on, I updated the process inside of the Fedora CoreOS to go layer by layer. So it would grab a layer from the registry, install it to the disk, discard it from RAM, go grab the next one.
No kidding. Oh, fascinating. Okay, so you get your Fedora CoreOS customized thing. You get it where it can stream the thing, so it runs into limitations. Okay, we boot off of the ISO. Then what does the installation look like? Is you got to click through the installer?
No. So what happens at this point is, as with many things, once you're done so when you install CoreOS in particular, there is something called a butane file, which is a file that has a bunch of instructions. It's kind of like a kickstart file or a sysprep file or something like that, that gives instructions on how to partition the disk and those sorts of things. Because the container image already has everything you need, really all that has to happen is the machine boots up, partitions the disk, then splats the container onto the hard drive in whatever partitioning format you have. Since everything is in the container, there is no installation process because you've done all of that in the container itself when you build it.
Okay.
What you do have is you still have to do user setup. So with GNOME, there's a first-time user setup that pops up when it boots for the first time. I'm sure other other desktops have something similar. Mm-hmm. Or you can provision the user. So what actually happens is after the machine is finished being provisioned, I bake into the process, into my container image, there's a first boot systemd unit, and that kicks off an Ansible playbook that installs the flat packs that I want. It makes sure that things like I'm connected to the right network. So one of the things that I did for the kids network, I didn't even share this with you, this is just an aside. Mm-hmm. As you know, I've got multiple SSIDs. Mm-hmm. Yes. And one of them is for my admin stuff so that it can reach all the things. I do not want these computers on the admin to reach all of the things, but it is the most expedient way during installation. So what actually happens, I baked that configuration into the Fedora CoreOS so that it connects to the admin LAN with the username and password and all that sort of stuff. When the first boot runs, it still has to connect and make sure that everything's okay. After it is part of the teardown process, it says what SSID should I be on, and that's inside of that config file that it pulls down. It deletes the admin LAN from the SSID, like all of the credentials and stuff like that, and then attaches it to the new SSID. So all of that is happening during the first boot process, to include things like stuff you can't do during installation, like I'm installing RustDesk as the application that I'm choosing to do remote work with. I am doing things like enabling the LAN discovery there, so that if you're on the LAN, you can find it. I'm enabling direct IP connection, so that if it's on Tailscale, I can just connect directly to it. And I'm also setting a default admin password, so that all of that stuff is baked in and the user doesn't have to do anything. That would have been a step that normally you actually log in as the user and then click through the UI and do all that stuff. So all of that is happening via Ansible before the user even logs in for the first time. And on one of my special, I still have a special snowflake where I combined ZFS with this process, so that the home directory is on ZFS with Sanoid and Syncoid for the very important computers that I have. And so one of the things that happens on this Ansible playbook is essentially a switch home directory, because at first it's just the operating system installs the home directory and creates the home directory when you create the user. But I also want to have it on the ZFS drive. So I can't partition the ZFS stuff in Fedora CoreOS because there's no ZFS. So what actually has to happen is that host, one of the things that happens in the Ansible playbook is it does all the ZFS provisioning and then mounts over top of the home directory. So it copies all the files out of the current home directory, puts them in the ZFS home directory, and then switches them out. Do you follow me so far?
I do. Yep.
Okay. So a bunch of that magic is happening, and all of this is driven by Ansible and the first boot config.
Talk to me a little bit about BootC. We've referenced that several times. If somebody has not heard of that before, what is it?
So BootC is bootable container, and essentially it's the technology that is allowing you to build a container that has a full operating system in it and install it to the hard drive. So the BootC suite knows how to take a container and put it on a hard drive and then boot that container, and then also concurrently switch between containers that you have, just like you would if you have an A/B partition. You can switch between container A and container B during updates and rollbacks.
Okay. Can you talk to me a little bit about the 12 hours you spent trying to automate a UI that you ultimately decided you didn't need? Unless it's traumatic and you don't want to talk about it.
It was pretty traumatic. I don't know that it's necessarily something I don't want to talk about. It was a little bit embarrassing. So I started off trying to work with Fedora Silverblue, and that ended up being... So I started that way. I didn't start trying to be going down the BootC process. I wanted to go, I just was like, okay, Silverblue is the way to go, right? Yeah. I had all kinds of issues with, so the RPM OS tree has to call out to various places on the web, because that's just the way that the RPM OS tree works when you're installing Fedora Silverblue. I was getting things like 404s because this particular section or that particular section either hadn't got updated or the pointer was wrong. I had problems with the Anaconda progress failing me during the installation for one reason or another. I was trying to do all of this work to work through automating the Anaconda installer with stock Silverblue, and it was for nothing, essentially. That's how it went. And it was one of those things that got to the end and why am I doing this to myself? You can do a kickstart and work with the Fedora Silverblue project that way. But one of the things that I had problems with is when I was trying to use Kickstart, it would go into the section of like, you want to do something, and it expects the user to be there. So even if you have a kickstart, it holds and waits for you to press the B button to begin, for example. And I tried 100 different ways to get that text to be inserted, and I could not get that to work. And so it's no big deal if you're doing it on your own laptop or you're doing it 1 or 2 times or even 10 times. Honestly, I could have sat in front of the laptop and hit B and moved on. But I was really trying to achieve that objective of like, I want this thing to just be like somebody plugs it in and that's it. And I couldn't get there with the Anaconda installer or Kickstart. It wasn't built for the workflow that I wanted.
You touched on this a little bit, but can you talk to me a little bit about how you achieved this zero-touch identity where it identifies the MAC address and then figures out its config based on it?
So part of this is built into how CoreOS can work. So when a Fedora CoreOS machine boots up, you can bake whatever it needs to understand to include the partitioning stuff into an ISO. You can type it in on the command line. Like when you boot up any CoreOS version, there's a bunch of like gobbledygook that you can type in, like, here's my whatever, your network will be this is what my MAC address, all of that sort of stuff. You can type that in, or optionally, you can tell it, here's a web endpoint, go look there. And it already has built into it, if there's a config file that matches my MAC address or one of the MAC addresses I have, I'll pull it down. And so I'm leveraging that to have config file that feeds into this zero touch installer. The config file is very basic. It has things like, this is what my SSID is, and am I a gaming machine? Should I install Tailscale? Just basic stuff like that. I think it's like 12 or 13 lines. And it just pulls that down, and the installer goes off to the races, essentially.
Huh. Interesting. Talk to me about any bugs that you hit that are worth sharing, because, I mean, to a degree, when you're automating things, it's kind of the best way to architect or engineer anything, because it means that if there's a problem, you're going to find it eventually.
Yes. So randomized MAC addresses are the bane of anybody trying to do any kind of network boot or predictable thing with a laptop, like the bane of. And you sit there, because my process was the VM, then my Dell laptop, which was sitting on my desk, so it was plugged in for the speed, so I didn't have to go over the very ancient Wi-Fi that was in there. And then I moved to like a laptop that was on Wi-Fi, and I would get completely unpredictable results. It would come back and be like, I can't find my config, or it would pull the wrong config. And I was like, what in the heck is going on here? Well, that privacy thing where phones and laptops will actually rotate their MAC addresses when they connect to an SSID really messes up this process.
Yeah, I bet it does.
Is it a bug? No, the network was doing what it was designed to do, but it was a bug from my perspective because I wasn't expecting it to do that, because I didn't tell it to do that. Right? So there are problems like that. I had problems with, and part of it was lack of understanding or handling on my part. Like I had problems with Wi-Fi passwords that had spaces in them because I had Ansible would silently truncate them, and it was totally me, the way that I was handling it. I admit that, but it's still something that, like, I stubbed my toe on that several times.
Coming out of this on the other end, you are at a place now where it sounds like you're kind of all in on Fedora. How has that transition been? Because, you know what, I think when you and I first got to know each other, you were kind of a Ubuntu on the server guy, and Arch on your desktop guy, and it sounds like you're almost all Fedora all the places.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that these machines that were endless rolled over to Fedora because that suited purpose. For machines that need to be more dynamic, I find that, at least for my case, rebuilding a container in order to bake in some of those utilities, not ideal. So, for example, you can pull lots of stuff out of FlatHub, but support for 7-zip, if it wasn't installed, was something that I had to rebuild the container for, because that's not just something you can go and install from FlatHub. Those sorts of things where they need to be baked into the image. It's unfortunate, right? Where you could do a DNF or a Pacman or an apt install and be done in 10 seconds. It was 5 minutes because you rebuild the container, push the container, pull the container back down. So I would say that my split is more, I have mostly RHEL on the servers. I have a couple of Ubuntu machines that I'm still quite happy with, which is why they're on Ubuntu. I have Arch for the machines, like the desktops and stuff like that are more dynamic. And Silverblue with BootC is going to be what I deploy when the machines are not so dynamic, like they're fit for purpose.
Did you deal with encryption at all? Are any of the machines encrypted? And if so, how did you crack that nut?
I did not deal with the encryption problem. I looked at it, and if I was going to do that, it would probably be with Lux during the boot process. But then that would defeat my zero touch install thing, because I'd have to be there to go type the password to decrypt it the first time it booted.
This is something that you taught me when you were teaching me about how to do design work. But there's a phrase that you use where you call it day two operations. Tell me what day two operations are as a general concept, and then how did that apply in this particular scenario?
So day two is essentially, I've installed the machine and it's up and basic, like the basic functionality is there. Day two is what you layer on top of it. So let's say you've installed KVM. Great, you've installed it, and it starts on startup. That's a day one type activity. Day two activity are things like what VMs get booted, what is my defaults going to be, where is my storage going to be defined. All of those sorts of things are things that are done post installation. So was that clear?
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And I think it's just the first time you used that phrase, I was like, I've never really thought about it that way. I've always thought about it like, well, when the work is done kind of a thing. And I think what you kind of clued me onto is, well, there's kind of two processes here, right? There's what we do and what they do. And so we get done. Now let's actually make sure it's ready for them to be able to work on it. And so I find it interesting and not all too far surprising that you chose to leverage that knowledge when you go to roll this out of your house. I mean, you essentially took an enterprise approach to doing this in your home, didn't you?
I did. And again, that was very, very much by choice so that I could continue to practice the skills, especially things that are up and coming. Like if they're in Fedora and they're, so RPM OS tree is going to go away. They've already said that. It is going to be BootC moving forward for Fedora at some point. Mm-hmm. So if that's the way Fedora is going, RHEL will go that way too. Going back to your day two question.
Yeah.
Day one in this case has three states. There's like the container file. Then there's the first boot, which does the provisioning of like all of the things. And then there's the kind of the steady state of the machine that's all wrapped up in day one. Day two is all the stuff that I kind of mentioned some of it, like making sure that RustDesk is set properly, making sure that all of the machines have the 2 or 3 plugins that I want everywhere, such as like the I think it's called Knotify or whatever. It's the GNOME plugin that puts all of your tray icons in. I wanted the min and max buttons on every machine. So all of these types of settings are really day two things. They don't impact the operation. It's more preference of the like setting the wallpaper and how the virtual desktops work, and all those sorts of things become day two config changes that get done in an Ansible process that runs before the user logs in.
I love that. In the end, what were your kind of takeaways? As you kind of wrapped it up, you kind of have your head on the other side of this, and now Steve's house is tightly dialed in, and really, man, have you chunked off an ability to do future proofing your house, right? Like the next year, it's not that there aren't technology is never stagnant, it never stops. So you're going to need to make changes, but now you're going to make those changes one time on a development machine, and then you're going to push it out, and the rest of them are going to take it. I guess actually before we wrap up, there's a question for you. Do you have like a staging machine? Like here's where you try all the stuff and then build it and then boom, make it live?
So you have to build and push the container to a registry before you can pull it down. So the answer to that is not specifically. Like I will continue to use my VM and probably the old Dell laptop just to make sure, but I don't actually expect any problems. Like if the container builds, it will be one of those things. Like I'm on my 10th iteration so far since the beginning of July, and I haven't had any of them fail to like boot or do the right thing. And so I don't anticipate that moving forward. I think that's part of the appeal of the containers. Like if it builds, the container works. Yeah. Generally speaking.
Awesome. Okay. What is your takeaway? What is your takeaway as you're kind of on the other side of this project? What do you think is like the biggest win? What would you tell somebody that's like, hey, I'm looking at chunking off a similar apple? What would you say the takeaway is?
For me, that immutable or that atomic aspect is achievable, and it's not less customizable. It is more work up front, but at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. Like you said, you do it once and then the clients get pinged saying, hey, there's an update. And it actually tells you, the update actually tells you when you boot it, it will tell you the date of the container. So when I boot it, it'll say Fedora 44.2026.0721, which was the last time I rebuilt the container. And it tells you that at the boot. So you know when the packages were last updated.
For the weeks of June 28th through July 12th, here's the Linux and open source news. PZIP 11.2 is now out. Proton 11 has officially been released. KDE Frameworks 6.28 is now available. Calibre 9.11 is out. Tmux 3.7 is now available. GNU Nano 9.1 is out. GNU Cache 5.16 has been released. Shotcut 26.6 is now available. Shotcut 26.6 is now available. Canonical announces live kernel patching for ARM64. System 76 has released Cosmic Epic 1.1, and the Linux 7.0 kernel has hit end of life. In distro news, Chaos has announced the release of 2026-06 with their new D-init system. Parrot OS 7.3 is out. Magia 10.0 has been released. Ultramarine 44 is now available. Knoppix 26.7 is out. 4M Linux 51.2 has been released. Portix 2.6 is now available. CatchyOS June 2026 has been released. The CatchyOS June 2026 ISO has been released with Hyperland and Noctalia. Hannah Montana Linux gets a modern remaster after nearly 2 decades. The new version 26 is built on Debian with a reskin of KDE Plasma. Ubuntu 25.10 has reached end of life. Debian 13.6 Trixie has been released. And Microsoft's new Azure Linux 4.0 is here, and it could replace Windows Server in the enterprise. In open source security news, a proof of concept exploit has been released for Linux bad epoll root access vulnerability. A 16-year-old Linux KVM flaw dubbed Yanescape lets guest VMs escape to hosts on Intel and AMD x86 systems. In open source AI news, Tencent releases HY3, an open source model that allegedly matches models up to 5 times its active size. ZAI's new GLM 5.2 model challenges Anthropic and OpenAI in overall performance. And Mistral's open source Leanstral 1.5 aces formal math benchmarks and catches real bugs in code. And lastly, GitHub has released a new tool to prevent costly open source license violations.
So, Framework has released their new 13 Pro, and one is on the way for Noah Chelaya. I don't often get brand new laptops, but there are some things in life that I think are really, really expensive and really, really worth it. And I think Framework is one of the things that has demonstrated to me they fit that category. When they first came out, I literally laughed at the people that bought the first generation. And I was like, well, that's silly. If the company goes under, then you're not going to be able, what good is a repairable laptop if you can't get parts for it anymore? And the joke ended up being on me because by the time the second generation came out, I wasn't laughing anymore. I was the stooge spending $1,000 on a new laptop. They were the people that are like, well, yeah, I just upgraded my motherboard for $350 or $400 and I got the newest chipset and I was able to just put it in there. So then I thought to myself, well, here's what we'll do. I'll be a cheapskate and I'll buy a used one on the eBay. So I went to eBay and I went to buy a cheap used one. Well, guess what? I waited for over a year, 2 years, and they just don't really come up for sale at any real significant discount. And I guess it's not terribly surprising because, again, why would there be a big discount if you can go buy the thing and just replace the parts in it and get it up to date? So when they released the Pro, I was like, oh, this is it. This is the straw that's going to break the camel's back. And so I have a 13 Pro on the way. And the Pro has refreshed what they call the second generation or their second real redesign. It's the first time that they've ever really done a redesign since the original design. Now, they tweaked a little bit here. They fixed the hinges and they've done a few things with the speakers, but this is as close as we've really gotten to like a true second generation of the original design. Now, the downside is that breaks compatibility for some, but not all of the laptop 13 components, most notably the bottom case. So the keyboard, the trackpad, and the original 55 watt hour, 61 watt hour battery, that is going to change to make some improvements for by way of a larger battery and better battery life and a general fit and finish. The result, though, means that you get one of the nicest looking, nicest feeling, most polished laptop designs out there that can go head to head with the MacBook. It's also possible for existing 13-inch users to get some or all the benefits by retrofitting their laptop with the new parts. Framework says that the 13 Pro is the first to be fully machined out of extruded blocks of 6063 aluminum, and that means that the device's body feels more solid, more substantial than the original version. The final change is to the screen, which keeps the same 13.5-inch resolution of 2880 by 1920 and an aspect ratio of 3 to 2, with a refresh rate of 30 or 120 hertz in an IPS panel and includes touch support. It's Framework's first generation touch display, but even if you don't care about that, you might like the other higher quality of life improvements like a 700 nit typical brightness and a 1 to 800 to 1 contrast ratio that's with an updated anti-glare coating. So I will tell you, I'm not a fan of touchscreens, don't really care for them, the smudge magnety, it's not for me. But the other thing that has been brought to my attention is that, well, how could you deal with a 3 to 2 aspect ratio? That's just ridiculous. I want 16 by 9. And I'll tell you something. I first of all, I don't know that I really care. That's part of it. But then the other part of me, there's a nostalgic part of me that I grew up with 4.3 monitors. So I grew up with ViewSonic 4.3 monitors. I really got into the Sony CRTs. IBM released what they called their Aptiva, which had this like black CRT monitor that stood above what was their version of almost like a docking station that then connected with a PCI card back to the tower that sat on the floor. Anybody that remembers this from the like 97, 98 era, there's a place in my heart that I just love that square aspect ratio as opposed to the rectangular one. Now, in some degrees, it's silly because our eyes can see wider than they can see tall. And so it's more realistic to life when you're watching movies and those sorts of things. But these days, particularly these days, everybody's on their darn phone, which means that websites are increasingly formatting themselves to be longer than they are wider. So I really don't mind a 3 to 2 aspect ratio. I think that will be just fine. And the thing that I think Framework has done better than anybody else is consistency. And so if you bought one of the first generation Framework, you're still able to upgrade it and you're still able to use it. And I'm going to come in on the 13 Pro side, and I feel like this is going to be the first laptop that I'll own that's truly replaceable and repairable and all the rest of it. So Steve, it's one of those things where like I know this probably isn't the right choice for you just by way of you're more of a desktop guy. But if you were, if let's say for the sake of argument, Red Hat was like, hey, we'll buy you whatever laptop you want, would the 13 Pro be a contender for you at all?
For a work laptop, maybe. But what really puts the brakes on for me is the LP Cam memory. Like I looked at that and went, "Ooh, no, thank you."
So let's talk about that. So for those that don't know about LP Cam memory, LP Cam memory is essentially it gives you the benefits of having soldered in memory, but it has modularity to it, and so you get the performance, power efficiency, and space savings of traditional DIMMs, faster speed, lower power consumption, and yet it's still modular. So with that explanation out of the way, what don't you like about LP Cam?
Where are you going to buy it? Like if the whole idea is this is upgradable, blah, 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 like I just went and looked at Amazon, Newegg, and eBay, and all of them have a single listing for $1,000.
Yeah.
For the 32 gig one. Like if your whole thing is like, I'm going to replace this. And I looked at this and went, that's bonkers. The vast majority of machines are not running this. And how long is this standard going to actually stick around for?
So I'll tell you this, just being blunt and upfront with you. I opted for 32 gigs of RAM instead of 64 because 64 gigs of RAM was going to cost me $1,400 in RAM alone.
It's now $1,600.
Okay, $1,600 in RAM. So, but you get the point. It was already, and so I got the low price of like $700 to get 32 gigs of RAM. So I share your concern. Okay, there's a limited places to buy, and I just bought it directly from a framework. But I share your concern. Limited places to buy, and it is frightfully expensive. Those two parts are true. However, I remember when Apple first released the MacBook with the first soldered-on memory, and I thought to myself, I will never, ever, ever buy that computer because I would never want to buy a computer that I couldn't change a RAM module. I've had RAM go bad. That's not a good day. And so the ability to swap it was huge. And yet, especially as we get into a world where shared memory is a thing and there's, and people want a gajillion hours on the battery and all the rest of it, the efficiency that comes from having soldered in memory, it's quickly becoming the standard. And so if I had to choose between soldered in memory and LP Cam memory, I'll definitely choose the LP Cam memory every time, even if it costs a few dollars more. But I share your concern. I don't know. I mean, I guess I would go back to Framework and buy it there because I don't know where else to buy it.
Yeah, like that is somewhat of a challenge. That would in and of itself be somewhat of a struggle for me, just given the fact that that's likely to be the thing that I want to upgrade the most.
Yep.
So, I mean, I know that people go out and buy the soldered in one, but then they're not buying a machine specifically for the ability to upgrade it.
Yes. Yeah, that's the other thing too. Somebody else, there's a friend of mine pushed back on this with me when we went through the soldered RAM, and he basically made the argument that laptops are disposable. They're not designed to last you forever. They're designed to buy you 5 years. And so his argument was that his company gives him a new laptop every 2 years. So his argument, if a laptop gets you 500 days, it's lived its life and it's time to move on. And I don't know, there's something about me that I grew up I saved up for 2 years to buy my first laptop. And so I come from a world in where I don't treat laptops as disposable. I also grew up at a time when you could fix all of the things, you could take it apart and repair it. And even the Dell Latitude 7330 that I'm rocking today, it wasn't necessarily built from the ground up to be repairable or replaceable. You have any idea how many times the trackpad in this machine has been replaced because it drank coffee? So, to a degree, it is an expectation that you can take these things apart and that you can fix them. I guess what it will really come down to me for, or like what will really sell it for me for, it will be if this thing shows up and the build quality is such that I can get 10 years out of it. If I can get 10 years out of a laptop, I think that's where I would say this is worth the money and I won't have any regrets. I think that's, if I get any less than 10 years out of it, that's where I'm going to go back to I could just buy used computers. Because when I do the math on it, I can routinely, all day long and twice on Sunday, go to the eBays of the world and pick myself up a gently used laptop that's within 2-3 years old, and I'll pay between $200 and $400 for it. So if this thing makes it 10 years, if we're talking about this episode in 2036, and Noah still has this Framework 13 Pro and it's still running and I'm still able to use it, that will get my average laptop cost down to $270 a year. And I feel like that will end up, that's in my head, that's kind of where I've drawn the line where I'm like, that's worth it. You think I'm crazy, or you think that's, he makes some sense there?
I mean, I think there's something to that. The thing that has always shortened lifespan for laptops is RAM.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's very, very rare that I get a laptop and it's like, you know what? The CPU just doesn't cut it.
Yeah.
That's super rare.
So what I hope will be my answer is, let's say I get 5 years in and 128 gigs, I'm just making these numbers up, I have no idea, but let's say 128 gigs becomes the new standard. I hope the answer that I give you is, oh yeah, I got to 2020, 2029 or 2030, and I decided that I needed 120 gigs or 8 gigs of RAM, so upgraded the motherboard for $300, and then I bought the new RAM, and hopefully by then we'll be past this ungodly resource hardware shortage that has just decimated the cost of IT.
Everything.
Oh my gosh, it's just unbelievable. Like anything from storage to everything has just gotten to be insane.
Yes, it has, and it just goes up.
All right, I want to get your thoughts on a story. It's an activist. He's been charged with a felony after a Customs and Border Patrol agent seized his Graphene OS phone. Now, get this. He's getting back from a trip abroad, and he lands in the United States, and the CBP agent says, I need your phone. And so the guy hands his phone over, and they're like, well, we need the code to unlock it. And he's like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I want an attorney. And they're like, nope, you're going to give us your code, or we're going to put it into a machine, and we're going to try to break into it. So he's like, okay, why don't you try this as a code? Well, it turns out the code that he gave him, Steve, was the duress code that's baked into Graphene OS. So what does Graphene OS do? It wipes the phone. The duress code is an optional feature of Graphene OS that allows the user to set a code that's different from the unlock code if you're worried about the contents of your phone falling into the wrong hands. You can enter that code into the lock screen instead of the unlock code. The phone then immediately and irreversibly deletes all of the data and eSIM stored on the device. Turnick provided this code to an agent who entered it on the phone, after which the screen went blank, flashed several times, and the phone appeared to restart. All data was gone, but authorities confiscated it anyway. Turnick was allowed to leave, but the U.S. Department of Justice opted to file criminal charges against him, a felony, in late 2025, citing a little-used statute that makes it illegal to knowingly destroy or damage property to prevent it from being seized. So this guy gets charged with a felony because the CBP agent enters a duress code into his phone. What in the world do we make of that?
Shouldn't touch other people's phones.
I figured you would appreciate this. 2-bit in the Geek Lab hashtag geeklab:/linuxdelta.com says it deletes the encryption key. So the chances of them being able to recover this data are like slim to none. Because it cycles the encryption key that's on the I forget what Google calls it, but there's like a dedicated security chip on there.
Like the TPM sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so it cycled it, and so now there's no way to decrypt that. All the data that's on there is just gobbledygook. But the thing that is fascinating about this, to be easy for me to say, is this is the first example that I am aware of Graphene OS being used in the wild to thwart the government. So we can talk all day long until we're blue in the face about, yeah, it's really great if you go and get a Pixel phone and load this weird operating system and click through all these things, and it's going to be way more secure and stable than we can say that, but this is where the rubber meets the road. It's the first time that a phone is confiscated. The government would like to get information off of this, and now they're not able to. It's going to be real interesting to see how this plays out in court. And if it does play out in court and this guy gets a bucket full of money, which I hope to God he does, I think it's going to set a precedent for the yous and the me's and the rest of the world to say, hey, this is why we run this goofy little alternative operating system on our phones.
Yeah. I don't even know what to make of that. I mean, it's that was designed for a reason. You just hope that you never have to use it. And the fact that someone I don't know. I don't know what to make of this because as far as I'm aware, there are a lot of laws on the books that say things like they can't compel you to actually give a physical password. They can compel you to unlock with like a fingerprint or Face ID or whatever. So then if they take it and try to force you to give them the password, which as far as where did this happen? Was this here in the U.S.?
It was here in the U.S.
Isn't that against the law? Or is he not a U.S. citizen?
I don't know, but I suspect that he is because he was an activist that was protesting a law enforcement training center inside of the U.S. So I am almost positive that he's a U.S. citizen who landed in the U.S. And your understanding is exactly correct. If they cannot, the courts have ruled multiple times that they can't force you to unlock the phone. What they're charging him with is using that duress code to wipe the device.
Right, but they were trying to force him to unlock the phone.
They were,
right?
and ignore his request for an attorney.
And he gives the bad thing under duress, and someone who takes property that is not theirs to access property that they're not legally allowed to access like that, then goes and enters something that wipes the device, and he gets charged for it.
You understand correctly. It's going to be real interesting. So here would be an interesting question to the audience. If somebody out there knows, particularly the security-minded among you, if you were to reboot the device, is there any additional threat vector? Because so far as I understand it, the encryption key is stored on the hardware token until it's released by way of you enter the correct code and then it's released. You enter the incorrect code 10 times, it's going to wipe that thing anyway. So he enters the duress code and it wipes it immediately. My question to the audience would be, had he just restarted the phone, is the phone in a state where the data's already encrypted and can't be recovered? They can't brute force the code because they get 10 shots and after that it wipes it anyway. Do I understand that correctly? And so in that case, would the better approach have just been say nothing, let them confiscate the phone, let them go do their thing, and in the process of doing so, they're likely going to cause it to erase anyway, and that gets you out of this felony? I don't know the answer to that, so I'm just asking questions. But anyway, I think it'll be really interesting. It will be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm going to watch carefully to see what happens with this case. We'll follow, and of course, we'll bring you the latest. Hey, join us Tuesday, August 4th, Tamarack Tap Room in Woodbury, Minnesota. The live recording starts at 6. We'll probably get there, I don't know, between 5:30, 5:45. And so come hang out with us. Enjoy an episode of the Ask Noah Show live from Woodbury, Minnesota at the Tamarack Tap Room. And then join us for dinner afterwards. We'll be hanging out. You get an opportunity to meet Steve and I. See that we're not AI-generated people, that we're real-life human beings. Tamarack Tap Room, 6 p.m. Central, Woodbury, Minnesota, next week. Hope to see you there.